Something that bothers me as somebody who loves books is when people complain about problems in a movie version of a story that only exist in the movie and were not there in the original book. One of the most notable versions of this problem comes from the 1939 MGM adaptation of The Wizard of Oz. A timeless classic, an excellent motion picture, a terrible adaptation of L. Frank Baum's book. A thing that people like to complain about is Glinda, the Good Witch of the South, and the fact that she sends Dorothy on this long, dangerous quest through Oz to get to the Emerald City, and then she has to go on another long, dangerous quest to kill the Wicked Witch of the West, when Glinda knew all along that the ruby slipper she was wearing had the power to send her home. The explanation she gives is awful too. "You wouldn't have believed me if I told you. You had to discover it for yourself." Bullcrap. The thing is, this problem doesn't exist in the original novel, because in the book, Dorothy doesn't meet Glinda until the end of the story. You see, in Oz, there are 4 countries, one each in the north, south, east, and west. And until Dorothy's house transplant, each of them had their own witch. East and west are bad, north and south are good. Just like Nebraska. In the book, the witch that sends Dorothy on her initial journey is the Good Witch of the North, who we learn in a later book is actually named Tattypoo. No, really, Tattypoo. That's her name. Say it with me. Tattypoo. Anyway, Tattypoo sends Dorothy off on her adventures. She travels all the way through Oz, cacks the witch, and then makes it to the Emerald City to get sent home. Then, after she finds out that the wizard is a humbug and his balloon soars off and leaves her behind, somebody tells her that the only person left in Oz who might be able to help her is Glinda, the Good Witch of the South. So now Dorothy has to take yet another journey down to Glinda's palace. Dorothy was really getting her steps in this book. When she finally gets to Glinda's palace, the Good Witch tells her about the power of the silver shoes to send her home. Side note, MGM made them ruby instead of silver like they were in the book because it showed off the Technicolor process better. Now, this does raise the question of why Tattypoo didn't seem to know that the silver shoes had the power to send Dorothy home, but at least it makes Glinda seem like less of a jerk. Tattypoo. I think it's important to remember that L. Frank Baum had no idea how big this Oz thing was going to become, that he was going to wind up writing 13 more books in this series, that a century and a quarter later there would still be adaptations and derivative works based on something he was just writing to pay the mortgage. He was also never particularly concerned about things like consistency or continuity. A lot of his later Oz books would introduce elements that straight up contradicted the earlier ones. For example, it's established in a later book that everybody in Oz is immortal, and even if you were to cut their body up into 1,000 little pieces, each individual piece would still be alive and conscious. I guess he thought that was better than death? Now, of course, this raises a very important question. So how did Dorothy kill the witch? We also discover that ordinary animals that are brought to Oz gain the ability to talk, like Dorothy's pet chicken Billina does in the 3rd book, Ozma of Oz. So why wasn't Toto talking in the 1st book? Somebody must have pointed this out to L. Frank Baum, because this is one of the few contradictions he ever even tried to explain. In one of the later books, somebody asks Dorothy that same question, why can't Toto talk? Dorothy makes the surprised Pikachu face, and then calls Toto over and starts badgering him, asking him if he can talk. She knows he can talk. Why don't you say something, Toto? Finally, they coerce Toto into admitting that he could talk from the very first moment he got to Oz. He just chose to keep that to himself. It may be the first retcon of the 20th century now that I think about it. Anyway, the point is, when you see something in a movie adaptation that seems to be a plot hole or an out-of-character moment or a contradiction, always check to see if that contradiction existed in the original source material before you start to complain about it. I'm not saying that those things aren't problems. I'm just a big believer in putting the blame where it belongs. What? What the hell is wicked?